Christine Williams is very well known to anyone who views CTS. For 7 years now, she has been hosting the very popular and award-winning On the Line show. She's coming our way to talk about Christine Williams rather than to interview a guest. But before we do that, let's take a look at this little clip.
Welcome to On the Line. I'm Christine Williams. Coming up, a look at exceptional career women from around the world and how they can inspire you. Stay tuned.
So that's how you see Christine introduce her show, but now let me introduce her here live. Nice to have you, Christine.
An absolute
Looking
privilege
terrific
to...
in that lovely outfit. I'm in black.
Like the tie, though.
Well, thank you, but I'm not in mourning. But anyway, 7 years, hard to believe, huh?
November is 7 years, and it's hard for even me to realize how fast that time has gone.
Yeah, and five shows a week, a lot of books to read, a lot of research to do. Are you looking for another 7 years?
I won't answer that very premature question at this time.
Well, a lot depends too on other things, but no, it's terrific, and you've won a few awards. That's got to be very gratifying.
Yes,
and,
it is.
People speak very, very highly of your show. I was reading some of the comments that some of your guests have made, and they're very, very positive, and rightly so. But I want to talk about Christine Williams, a person. A lot of our viewers wouldn't know that you come from Trinidad.
Yes.
And you have gone through the process of being an immigrant in Canada. I want to talk about that. But first of all, tell us about your early years.
Early years were not easy, Jim. Up to the age of 4, everything seemed fine. I'll give you a quick background on what our life was like. My parents were both working in Trinidad. My mom at the university. My dad was a teacher. We were being raised by a nanny. What would seem like the picture-perfect life. But my parents immigrated here, and before they decided to make a definite decision, they left my sister and I in the care of some caregivers. Well, during that time, unfortunately, I saw the horrific end of abuse, being beaten to a frazzle quite frequently. It was devastating, missing my parents, missing the lady that was raising us, the nanny that I'd come to love so much. So that separation was very difficult, which was accentuated by the beatings that I endured at that very young age. Well, my parents did return, and they decided to move to Canada with my sister and I, which we did. We came to Canada. Again, a very difficult process, because as immigrants, one has to understand, too, that 40 years ago, in Canada. We grew up in Hamilton. Life was very different then. Words like multiculturalism were not used the way they're used today. It wasn't as diverse back then as it is today. Visible minorities were not accepted as they are today. So my sister and I were victims, if you want to put it this way, of bullying because of our backgrounds. We were bullied, typically bullied in school. It came to the point where my parents actually had to hire somebody, an older student, to walk us to school. It had gotten so bad. And you fast forward that some years later, it was very difficult for my parents because they had known a very prominent lifestyle in Trinidad. And although they had good jobs here in Canada, still their status, social status had changed, being visible minorities. So it was difficult for them to adjust. And in the process, they took a couple of moves back to Trinidad and then decided to move to Canada again. And that itself is a long story.
Well, the moves back and forth
Yes.
have got to be very dislocating. For
very
you.
Dislocating
Yeah.
and devastating in terms of trying to create a natural foundation for yourself.
Well, especially as a young woman, a young kid, you've got friends here, you've got friends there. You're being ripped out of that social context into another one, and re-entry. I mean, little wonder you refer to your early years as very difficult.
Very difficult. And one of the ways I cope, Jim, and I laugh about it today because I really believe that laughter is a strong medicine in life. I made a lot of trouble in school. I talked, I grinned, I found the troublemakers, I got kicked out of most of my classes. I became a bit of a troublemaker in school.
And when you think back, was it because of the unsettledness of your life, or it was just your nature to be a troublemaker?
Some of the people I work with might say it's my nature. I laugh sometimes and I say, well, going back several decades, If you fast forward this today, I may have been one of those Ritalin kids,
Right.
as you put it, by nature.
Right.
But part of it also had to do with that sense of dislocation and being determined to just enjoy myself. You combine that with easy boredom. I mean, you're looking for a recipe for trouble, which I had become.
Now, you were raised Roman
Yes.
Catholic, but you, into your teenage years, you began to explore the occult.
Yes, I did. In fact, I'll tell you, Jim, and I'm going to go back to when I was 4 again. When my parents came back to meet us, we moved over to my grandparents for a while, and during that time we got into a horrific car crash. So that even added to the torment of my early years. The difficulty with the abuse, and then after that to endure the accident. It was interesting that I actually have to say at that point that for some reason I started to get an interest in spirituality, because I actually remember asking my mother the question, if the devil wanted me to fall down and hurt myself, will I do so? I was investigating at that age, not realizing the impact of what I was asking. But looking back, there was an interest in spirituality. And that interest grew to the point where, when I was an early teen, I started to read information about the occult. And it grew from there. And it was a way of gaining back, I suppose you can say, the power that I'd lost in life. And Jim, there is power in the occult, and the danger in that kind of a life is, it gives you a power that you have absolutely no control over, and it's very, very dangerous. A lot of the kids today are exploring Wicca, and they're exploring other forms of the occult, and they don't realize the darkness that comes along with that.
No, you reached a point where you pretty much gave the Lord an ultimatum.
Yes, I did.
It's either you or it's Satanism. What brought you to that point? And why did you even think about praying to God when you're considering Satanism?
I grew up in the Catholic Church, so I was aware that there was a God. And I'd had so many experiences in the occult at that point that I fully understood that there was definitely an alive power of God out there, but I also realized that there was also enormous darkness that was extremely powerful as well. And because I was experimenting, if you want to put it that way, with both sides, trying to gain knowledge and learn more about the two, it got to the point where I did come to God because I had an inner love for God. I understood, being raised in the church, that God does look out for his people. So I cried out to God a lot in my life. But at that point, I was upset at that point, angry, distraught, and I said, look, I can't sit on the fence any longer. I'm aware of the hierarchy of evil. I'm aware of a hierarchy of God, but I don't know where to turn anymore, but I can't sit on the fence. So God, if you don't reveal yourself to me in the next week, I'm going to have to go full-fledged. And I'm not proud in saying this, but it was a reality, into Satanism.
And so what happened?
I met a lady through my sister that she knew. And she was a very spiritual lady, not a religious lady, but very spiritual. But her belief was in Christ. I asked her a lot of questions, and she just knew the right answers to say. And not only this, but I saw an amazing love in this woman, something that I hadn't seen, that I hadn't known in the past. And it drew me to this. It drew me to want to know more about what she was sharing. And this lady, Lynn her name is, in fact, she works at Crossroads today. She invited me to Bethel. And I went there.
Which is a local church in Hamilton.
Yes, it's a local church in Hamilton, to a Rich Wilkerson crusade. And the power of that service in terms of identifying how God can truly transform the worst of lives. They talked about cocaine users, which you and I know very much how difficult that is to transform a cocaine addict. But it was happening. So I was drawn to that, not forgetting that in my life, I didn't want anything watered down. I wanted to know the reality and the existence of God. And that day, I gave my life to the Lord Jesus.
And were you aware at that point in time of something good happening in your life, or was it a long process? People often refer to, the light turning on, or to a critical turning point in their life, or to conversion. How did it impact you?
A critical point of conversion, Jim. It wasn't gradual, because the hatred and the anger and the bitterness that I had stored up in my heart from the past, from the pain of bullying, from being abused early on, plus when I was 17 years old, it's a long story, but my mom was living in Trinidad while my dad was living here, and it was my sister and I just, at that point in life, fending for ourselves, and that added to it. But I was such an angry teen, it became impossible even for my dad to speak to. And the transformation after finding the Lord was it was abrupt. It was indeed a light going on, and it was very transformational.
And what did your family think about this new Christine? Did they think it was a phase?
My mother in particular, I'm very close to my mother. Her and I share the same chemistry, a lot of the same views. She noticed a difference. She noticed that. I talked to her about some of the changes, but at the same time, there were other events going on in our household that were traumatic to my parents, involving my sister at that time. And they had their own issues to deal with at that moment. My mother ended up with an illness. But at the same time, they saw what was happening. And they certainly had an appreciation for the new Christine that wasn't so difficult to deal with anymore.
Now, you met your husband in Trinidad, right?
Yes, I did, interestingly enough.
Yeah, you've been married for, what, 25 years?
25 years this August.
In fact, I think we got a picture, don't we? Yeah, there you go.
Very casual picture, my husband and I.
And what's his name?
Vince.
Vince. And he's a policeman.
Yes, he is.
And
this is? That's my oldest daughter to the right, her name is Natasha.
Right.
And to the left, that's Philip, our youngest.
Ah.
And that's Shelley, our middle daughter in school, fiddling with a camera. One of her friends took that picture.
Well, they're outstanding looking kids, my goodness.
Thank you.
They're young adults now, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
25 years married, I mean...
They are young adults.
Young adults, terrific.
Yes.
Now, you've met some pretty interesting people in your program, but two come to mind that you wanted to talk about. One was the Lieutenant Governor, David Onley. Tell us about him.
Yes. David Onley there he is in that picture, a remarkable, remarkable individual. Yeah. This fellow had polio in his toddler years. And what struck me about that interview is that he's a strong man of faith. He never defined his life by his polio. His parents never defined his life by his polio. Because, Jim, the critical importance here of what I would like to bring to the table is all of us have experienced various types of difficulties in our lives. Some of us have been victimized more than others. But we cannot define ourselves by our victimization. We cannot define ourselves by our weaknesses or our so-called earthly handicaps. When you look at David Onley, this fellow that had polio from very young, and he's still in a wheelchair today, he's an amazing man doing great things in this province, yet he never defined himself by his early polio.
And you can identify with this.
I can.
Because you could have been a disaster.
Complete disaster.
You could have been one of those statistics of a kid who just loses her way, and you could have ended up living on the street or something with all of the anger issues and the dislocation as an immigrant and so on. Like Onley, you found a moral center, an anchor in your faith.
Yes, I certainly did. And that's Jesus. Yeah. Because when you look at what the gospel teaches, and that's an issue even in today's society, people often that don't understand what the saving grace of Christ is, they see scriptures, they see the rules in scriptures as being somehow a form of imprisonment. It's not. It's very liberating and it's very freeing, understanding and knowing that as a loving parent, many people have had parents that were not so loving, but God is a loving parent, that those rules are in place for our good and for our liberation.
Another guest that you had, an outstanding guest, Pastor Kyles?
Yep, Reverend Billy Kyles.
Billy Kyles?
Yes.
Let's take a look at him now.
There he is, an amazing man.
I didn't know about this man until I was reading a bit about your life and your program. Tell us about this man.
Back in the civil rights movement, there were, just before Martin Luther King was assassinated, there were 3 ministers, including Martin Luther King and Reverend Billy Kyles and Reverend Abernathy, that were in a hotel room for an hour together before that fateful day when Martin Luther King was assassinated. Reverend Billy Kyles is the only one alive today, and he witnessed the assassination. What he told me on the interview was the horrors of the civil rights movement, the way those people were killed, massacred, hosed down with power hoses, the way they were treated, and particularly that Martin Luther King lived on a daily basis with the fear of assassination. His life was extraordinarily tormenting, yet at the same time, he was grounded in his faith and a sense of purpose. So another example of someone coming to the table, recognizing the greatness of God and keeping his focus on that as opposed to the torments and the tribulations and the victimizations of his own life.
It's not going too far to say that when you sit down with people like this, it can be a life-changing experience for us. At least in terms of how we see things. Our life is, you know, I remember reading one time that we grow by the people we meet and the books we read, and you know, people like you and me, if that's the case, are growing all the time because we're meeting new people and reading their books all the time. But when you think back over the course of 7 years of hosting On the Line, would it be fair to ask you who stands out, maybe the top 2, top 3 of all of the interviews you've done?
Wow, that's a very interesting question.
I think
the two I just showed there, those were the two. I would have to say those two did it.
No, Kyle's I never met, but Onley certainly. I had him on my Eye to Eye show a couple times. An outstanding man, and when he became Lieutenant Governor, I wasn't surprised. I mean, here is a true Canadian hero.
Okay, I'll mention one other person.
Yeah.
You asked me 2, but I'll give you 3. Willie Ames, actor Willie Ames, because he's well known to, I suppose, a lot of the audience watching and to the secular world at large. That man had a life-changing experience too, and he found the Lord later in life. But when I interviewed him, he talked about going to the Playboy mansions, talked about falling over the deep end, living a life that was questionable, but at the same time, he eventually came to know the Lord, and that completely transformed his life. It's the transforming of lives that I'm seeing, Jim, that speaks volumes.
And yet your program is not seen as a Christian show. You're dealing with secular issues, everyday issues that all Canadians are concerned
and multicultural
about.
Ones.
Multicultural ones.
Right.
And you also from time to time have people on from different religious backgrounds and traditions. So you have a very interesting place to fulfill there on CTS. In terms of your future, are you feeling fulfilled in what you're doing now?
I'm very fulfilled in what I'm doing, but in addition to that, I also write, and I find that very cathartic as well. I'm a columnist for Metro News, and from time to time, I also submit articles for Front Page magazine. I've been involved in a symposium involving homegrown terrorists there, which is of great interest to me, because there are many reasons why, not to justify them, why people choose that way of life.
So, you know, as we have health and strength, 10 years from now, will you still be doing what you're doing now, or is there something unfulfilled yet in terms of your far horizon?
I think in life, Jim, there's something to be said with waiting on the Lord, but I have to definitely qualify that, because saying you're waiting on the Lord could also be an excuse for not having goals, and we have to know our own hearts in truly seeking what God would want for our lives. But I truly do enjoy writing as well, so that's an area that I'm developing more as I go along.
What kind of writing do you want to do?
What kind of a writing do I want to do? Jim, you're a probing man, and I don't blame you.
You want to write novels? You want
no, it
you
can't
want to
be
do
novels.
academic works? You want to do
more academic, I
academic?
think, yes, and more exploring, I think, our multicultural community. Avenues there.
Yeah.
Avenues there.
Do you feel fully a Canadian now?
I am fully a Canadian, and a very proud Canadian.
And do you go back to Trinidad once in a while?
The last time I've been back there was 1984.
Oh my!
And it's a beautiful country. I don't think a person should ever say bye-bye to their roots. There's a respect for that.
Right.
But being a Canadian is a privilege. And this is a country where the freedoms are enormous, and we certainly can't take that for granted.
No. Well, Christine, you're a terrific example of someone who has been there, done that, and so young. So much ahead of you.
Well, thanks for that compliment.
No, this is terrific talking to you, and I hope our viewers who enjoy your show now feel that they know you a little better. Thanks for coming our way.
Jim, it was a privilege.